Data Center 4.0, the future of the digital ecosystem. In this podcast series from DigitalCentre, data center leader, expert and APAC-based marketeer Omer Wilson will be in conversation with technology and industry experts on the future of the data center and the wider ecosystem. Today's tech-fueled transformation era is putting traditional data centers under unprecedented pressure. This pressure is coming from businesses, users and consumers from every physical, virtual and cloud-centric angle. What does the future hold for the data center? Hello and welcome to the next installment in the DigitalCentre podcast series. I hope you're all keeping safe and keeping well wherever you're joining us from the world. Really appreciate the time you all give to these podcasts and the feedback and the recording access and downloads that we see. We know how many calls are happening at the moment across the world, especially in the current pandemic climate. So really appreciate the time that you're putting aside to these calls and these series. Today we're going to focus in on a topic which not just for the data center industry, but pretty much all industries in the world is one of the most important topics there is really in and around and focused with the pandemic and the digital transformation piece really running parallel. It's around sustainability and within the data center industry as they become so important as a utility really for us to be able to function. Why do sustainability goals matter? And to discuss this, I'm really happy that we have the Vice President of Co-location and Hyperscale for ANZ and Southeast Asia and India at Vertiv, Mr. Tony Gaunt, joining us. Tony, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Omer, good afternoon. Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, where everybody is. Really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you. Look
forward to the discussion. And again, just to reiterate for the listeners, obviously Vertiv, one of the steering committee members of DigitalCentre, as is Digital Realty, and you can find a lot more information on both companies on the steering committee homepages on the DigitalCentre platform. So with that, let's kick in and go through. Let me tee up the questions. And first one, Tony, for you, from a sort of industry perspective, and if you want to comment also from a regional perspective, why is it so important for data centers to prioritize sustainability? And tied to that, what are some of the unique challenges that these critical infrastructure points are now posed for the wider environment?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic and a very, very leading question, I suppose. When we think about sustainability and how we need to ensure we meet our needs but don't compromise future generations' ability to do so, it's the data center industry now across the world, across all of Asia Pac. We're a very, very high consumer of energy and also a very high provider of content, access, material, operation for our working social lives now. And when we think of the pure megawatts of power that we consume now, in some centers, 100, 200, 300 megawatts, a gigawatt here, a gigawatt there. Sustainability now is of such an order of scale that we just have that. We have an inherent need to ensure we do prioritize sustainability. It's gone from being the asterisk, the catch point in a financial report where organizations 15, 20 years ago would say, hey, we have a sustainability aim, we have a CSR department, that we now are a priority in terms of energy consumption around the world. Now, that's not without saying, however, that we also, I think, as a general industry have always had a view that we want to consume as little electricity as possible, as little water and as little resources as possible in fulfilling our demands. And when we think about this to the second point of your question with the unique challenges, Omer, that We also have to think about how we design and operate our data centers as well. They play fundamental parts in how sustainable we can be. So they're the challenges that we have to face. And we also have to remember that we have to operate data centers to suit our business models. In the bulk of people running data centers are doing so for profit. So we have to somehow mix the need to be sustainable and to be doing the right thing, but also doing so with an eye and an ear to the correct economic senses, as well as, especially from the colo guys' perspective, of meeting the demands of our ever-increasing high-performance customers. So it becomes a very complex question very early on. And it's a long way from, hey, we'll just buy carbon credits, or we'll increase the operating temperatures, or buy an energy-efficient UPS. We've now got to look at the fundamentals of how we design and operate data centers.
Got it. I think the economical angle, Tony, is so relevant, and that's what's gonna start to move the needle, which I sense it is as well. It's there's nothing. We want to respond to the world and the situation it is in as good social citizens, which in the main corporates are honestly I believe, but at the same time they're operating to make revenue. So having an economic angle to it, which more and more now it is really going to seems to fast track it. One follow-up question, because you made the point there, I think, which is another really important one. Can you talk a little bit from your own experiences as well to the differences between a consumer data center or even a technology provider data center versus a co-location operating data center? Because one, both are growing, but obviously colo data centers in Asia are growing, arguably faster, just maybe because the technology providers can't get enough space themselves to do it, because some are doing it themselves as well. There's a bit of a mix, but just can you talk to the differences between the two, and do you think that eventually one will help the other? Is end users a little bit more advanced in some areas where it can help the colo providers, or vice versa? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's again from past experience, current experience, and high probability moving forward. Everything you've said there, we do see that. So the fundamental difference, I believe, is that if you're a cloud operator building for your own purposes, you have the luxury of being able to optimize location and your electrical and mechanical critical infrastructure to suit what you're actually installing. So you can go right the way down to the rack and say, right, what is the technology going at rack level, at server level, and grow out from there, from the critical infrastructure, to create a critical infrastructure. And because it's being built also typically with redundancy and availability zone level, so data centers become the redundant element, and less so the redundancy within the facility. The network, the connectivity around that availability zone allows a sense of freedom in terms of the design of the entire infrastructure. When we though transfer that to the co-location facilities, we can wind the clock back maybe 10, 15, 20 years. And the demands were coming typically from the financial services sector, that everything had to be 2N, multiplied out, high investment cost, high space, high maintenance. And the reality was that facilities were running typically 25, 30% operating points, which is inherently inefficient, both from the cost of capital to build, but also in the OPEX as well. As we've seen now, Colos design, we could call it a generic design for the cloud and hyperscale companies. There's always going to be a compromise in what they supply and deliver based on who the target clients would be, what the SLAs would be. And there's a midpoint, there's a median area where they can say, okay, this is kind of the sweet spot for that industry. So that's definitely seen a big improvement in terms of the operating efficiency and construction cost as well. But what we're definitely seeing now is that design to suit, build to suit for particular clients now, where we're getting that hybrid solution, that cross-breeding, if you like, where the cloud user, the hyperscale user that's being targeted is now actually influencing, if not instructing, the hyperscale colo provider in their designs and operations. So we're getting that growth, that design change almost by osmosis. That, again, from an economic point of view as well as an operation point of view, if you want to compete, you have to give the customer what they need, and don't over-engineer. Right? You remember, not long ago, people used to chase a PUE. They always wanted the best PUE. But again, there you used to reach a tipping point where a 0.01 improvement in PUE came at significant cost. And I think we're now seeing that compromise, that desire to chase the best number disappear now. As people look to actually optimize the design of a data center and the operation of a data center to suit the actual client. And I think, again, when we think of the colo space, we've gone from, typically, I'll say this as a generic statement, we've gone from the pure retail play colo provider who would happily take 2 racks, 5 racks, 10 racks, or 100 racks. And that would always be a compromise as well now. And people are specifically designing their data centers now to suit very targeted markets. And that's helping the industry in terms of the sustainability of those sites.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And I think there's, areas and references there you made around the, end user versus the provider, which, we're seeing in the market, especially in Asia. And almost used a good word there around the almost the cross pollination, let's use another word, of experiences and technology between the two areas, they battle the same requirements and issues. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So let's.
Can I just add to that as well? Go. Just something you said as well there, Orna, that makes me think. The cross pollination is a good term, because when we think of the geography of Asia Pacific now, there are certain countries that are more mature in their data center designs and their customers' knowledge. And where we're at now is the opportunity for some of the countries that we're seeing the large colos and the large cloud and hyperscale guys begin to target. There's a real learning opportunity for the industries as well. If we think back to when some of the developing countries in Asia went straight to 4G, they never had copper, right? Mm-hmm. There's a huge lessons learned and an ability to leapfrog technology and design here. So for the wider data center community to actually learn from each other and take those steps and be right first time. Okay, there's all those baby steps we all took and all those learnings and failures and successes that we had. That some countries now don't need to have that. They can go straight in there with viable solutions.
Phenomenal point. Yeah, 100% agree. And also, it's interesting actually. It's such a valid point in this discussion, because in the emerging markets, the large new markets like the Indonesia and the Indias, where you just have to go and look on the ground there. You're seeing the creativity around the need to provision sustainable solutions, because it is one, you can access renewable energy at a better rate in some of these locations, ironically, than some of the more developed Asia Pac markets. But then also too, as you said, because this is the current reality. So because you're in emerging markets, you have to adapt to that. So we could almost see a lot of leapfrogging, right? Ironically, with these emerging markets becoming much more sustainable in terms of the end product than some of the more developed ones in a relatively short time frame.
Absolutely right. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the data, but I remember seeing a report regarding how many gigawatts of energy that India has from pure renewable sources. It's phenomenal. Huge. China and India, you're right. Yeah. Massive amounts. Very true. It's fantastic.
Great. So that's teed it up nicely. So let's get into the crux of the matter, the meat, so to speak, and look at from your perspective, and we're not going to solve it on this call. It'd be great if we could. We'd be very popular and very successful. But what do you feel? What are the sort of the pillars? Let's say from your perspective, if we had to put you on the spot, what are the pillars that you think can be done now to help meet a lot of these sustainability goals within the data center industry? What are the quick wins and maybe the more midterm opportunities?
Wow. Well, I'd like to pick you up on the first point. I do not have a design for a perpetual machine, so you're right. We're not going to solve it on this initial conversation, that's for sure. I think it's a very clear point you make, because we have to break. If we take your comment about the pillars, if we break this down, what are we currently operating, and how can we optimize those sites? So that's the first question. Quite often we see data centers. They're built, they're designed, they're built, they are commissioned, tested, handed over, typically with everything running at full 100%. Temperatures tend to be pretty cold on the cooling. We're not measuring airflow, we're not controlling, we don't have closed loop controls. So the first thing we can do is look at, maybe regular optimization conversations. Okay, I can think of somebody that we did this for recently. We had a data hall that was 2 megawatts. It was about 5 years old, 2 megawatts of cooling. It was five years old. And just by tuning the cooling, we took 100 kilowatts out of the energy consumption for that one hall. Okay, they're the easy fixes. Run the cooling at higher temperatures. Do you really need those UPSs still in double conversion? That's one of the questions I would always ask people. It's become normal. There's a fear factor behind always needing to be in double conversion, but there's 2 and 3% available to everybody if we were to run in the VFD offline modes. Okay, now
and you say
again. Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt you, but you say quick wins, but that 200 kilowatt example, if you added up the potential impact of the quick wins, of just doing the quick wins now, Tony, we're talking huge savings, right? If you just did that in the next 3 to 6 months across the region, let's say just in APAC, it could be huge savings already.
That 100 kilowatts doesn't sound like a lot, right? When we put it in the factor of an entire data center industry. But at the current energy usage rates and charges you're going to hear in Australia, that's about $100,000 a year saving, operating cost, just like that. Right? They're the quick wins. Fix what you've already got. We know about containment. We know about filling all the gaps in brushes, blanking plates, etc., covering up floor tiles that are unnecessary. So they're the really quick wins. Then we can look at what are we currently designing and what can we actually optimize in that design. And that's why I liked the term subsistence when I was thinking about this a while ago. That the definition I found for subsistence was using the minimal resources necessary. So are we using just enough infrastructure, or are we putting too much infrastructure in a building? Okay, is the design and the architecture exactly what we did 5 and 6, 10 years ago? How much water are we actually putting through this building? Right. A lot of the time when we talk sustainability, everybody immediately thinks of energy consumption, whether it's within the facility or back to grid. But what about the water usage that we're putting through here? Okay, so there's some of the midterms that we can think about. And then the long term, I would suggest, is as an industry, we need to think about what is the right solution from a design perspective. Now, I know some organizations use their design as a unique selling point or as a differentiator, but how can we all learn from each other? How do we as an industry get together and establish what would work and could work, right? What about using behind the meter or grid connect facilities where we're using the technology that already exists, right? We've all got big banks of batteries sitting in data centers that 99% of the time are doing nothing except sitting there charged. There are systems and tools and methodologies out there that would allow us to actually discharge those batteries back into our own building to power the building. Okay, now clearly we have to respect the fact that we still need that battery if we ever need it, so we can't do a full discharge. But it's possible to actually do that, so why not? And I think this is also part of the problem that we have as an industry as well, is we tend to be quite risk averse. We're a very, very critical industry. To my perspective, we're the same as the utilities. We are a utilities and industry. So there's always that risk of, do I want to be the first? And the potential for failure, for reputational damage, whatever else might occur. So we've got to respect that perspective as well, that nobody wants to be the first person to try something really, really new. And back to your earlier point about the cloud and hyperscale guys, it tends to be those guys who can do so because it's self-contained within their facilities.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference there in what people can do. So that's the long, that's, I would say, the short, easy, the medium, and the longer term view that we could take. And keep learning from each other. You know, one of the best conversations I enjoy is talking to people about what are the best practices around the world. What can we learn from each other? There's a mine of information in this industry. So, you know, we just got to keep using ourselves and self-educate.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And I think that sort of industry sharing and, you know, be it whatever different associations by country and between countries is something not just for this, obviously for the data center industry, but you see more and more happening around even, you know, access to renewables. You know, I'm thinking Southeast Asia as a prime example is eventually do we go to, you know, a shared grid of some form just for you know, pushing around renewables across the world. You know, obviously country borders and payments and all this is, you know, massive hurdles to overcome. But, you know, in the future, we'll see, you know, will that come to pass? So a little bit, but not as hard, hopefully, as the, you know, future global energy usage predictions. If you had to look ahead to the next 5 years, and goodness, if we'd asked this question at the end of 2018, anybody who was answering would be not looking very good now, given what's happened with the pandemic. It'd be you know, any response you gave would probably be lacking. But if as much as we can in the current normal we're in and looking maybe 5 years out, where do you see the data industry going? You know, based on a lot of the factors you said there, you know, changes around usage, sustainability targets, you know, the push of digital transformation, the growth of the huge growth of the cloud and hyperscale providers, as well as the colo providers. What sort of shape do you think the DC industry is going to take? And you know, do you think the sustainability targets are going to mold the industry almost in terms of its shape by then? What do you think?
Wow, I need a crystal ball and I need some investment capital.
You'll be a very popular man and a rich man at the end of that.
Well, I'll have that perpetual machine I was telling you about. I think that's very interesting. I think we're back at that point now where everybody has talked now for a number of years about the edge. And for my mind, we are going to go beyond those large, primarily metro-based data centers where we start to put multiple 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, 200 kilowatts data centers near where people need them. You know, you talked about India, you talked about Indonesia. We have geographic challenges for various reasons, whether it's islands or just sheer mass of a country that need addressing from a latency, from a connectivity perspective. And when we start to factor 5G in as well, we're only going to get bigger. And funnily enough, you know, we can talk about, well, I can say we're going to get bigger in terms of volume, but smaller in terms of capacity. But as you said, 5 years ago, 2 megawatt would have been a big data center. Now we're talking about that as pushing compute out to the edge to a second or third tier city in some instances. So I think we're definitely going to see that out there, and maybe that will also breed that opportunity and development of alternate technologies where we don't necessarily need to be on grid. We could have self-generation. We could have combinations of wind and solar on facilities that would allow this. We see this all the time now with telecom towers, right? There's nearly always some means of solar connected to a telco tower. So I think that's definitely somewhere that we will see now more and more of the regional smaller data centers. And I actually think it might even be easier to do that because you then can create that sustainable grid, the renewable energy grid for those facilities, more than you can, say, from a CBD location, say, in any city in Southeast Asia, and let's just pick on a city just for the sake of it, as an example, is in KL. How do you create in Cyberjaya a completely separate renewable grid? You're probably not going to be able to do that just from a pure logistics and cost perspective. But there's nothing to stop you doing that in the regional KL, maybe out on the East Coast, where you can build dedicated grids of renewables. So I think we might find that geographic diversity will help the development of renewable energy sources for those facilities.
Excellent point. And I mean, it's a very small example, but as you were speaking then, I was just thinking about it. It just sort of visualized it in my mind. But these, like micro data centers is the way to term them, I guess. But these I won't give the name of the provider, but people can sort of look it up. But I think it was New York State, they tested these micro edge data centers, purely solar powered, right, and self-sustaining. And they're just these small units sitting at the edge of the city or somewhere around the state. And it ties exactly to what you're saying, and actually ties also to your point around the battery piece, where people could share battery power between them and solar power, and if you think about then automation and the impact of AI, it's this self-sustained grid of edge micro facilities, and maybe the metro data centers, the more traditional, are where the analytical hubs where the data comes back to eventually, and they become sustainable as well, but maybe there's less of them, clearly. So very interesting, really interesting.
And your localized ones, whether we call them micro, whether we call them second or third tier cities, whatever, they will become more and more critical. And it's important to point out as well, those large metro, if we said the data centers we know exist or are in construction now, they're not going to disappear. I honestly believe that they're not going to disappear. They are a fundamental part now of the industry. But I think as well, we'll get to the point where we've got to think about how fast we deliver these. Right? We can't wait one year, 18 months to stand up 1-2 megawatts of data center anymore. So we've got to get to that point as well, where we're actually delivering these things, not just effectively and quickly, but sustainably as an industry of suppliers and providers. Right? And even from a supply chain point of view, if we start to think about it from that side of things, what are the vendors doing of these data centers? Because we're getting more and more now turnkey style, whether we call them modular or whatever we actually describe them as. From a production point of view, what is the industry doing to ensure its supply chain is sustainable? Not just how we operate, but the people, the organizations, like Verti, for example, what are we doing? So we've got a responsibility as well.
Well, that ties really nicely to what will be the last question. Actually, time's flown by, Tony. So we definitely need to do a follow up on one of these for sure. But not necessarily just to data centers. You can feel free to comment on your on other sectors as well if you feel relevant. But you made the comment earlier around how in the the data center industry, given it there's the critical nature of the delivery, obviously you've got different providers, positioning design as a key differentiator. So you mentioned the collaboration and maybe the more sharing between the industry, which I think is a great point. But along with that and anything other, do you feel there's more that data centers can do from now to the future, not only to limit their own impact from their facilities, but to then help, if you're thinking from a colo provider perspective, the multiple organizations that sit within their buildings. Do you think there's more, or there's opportunity there for the industry to help that change?
I'd like to kind of twist the question a little bit. I don't want to sound like
I don't
want to sound like a politician too much here. There's just another thing that I think you touched a point there when you said about we as an industry and what we do. Now, a couple of thoughts here for you is and a general observation. There are too many males of a certain age group in this industry. And that needs to change. We need to be reaching out far wider and encouraging more and more people of all ages, genders, educations, experiences to come into our industry. So when we talk about helping, that's the other element, is society. What are we as an industry doing to sustain our industry when we've all retired? Where's the new blood coming into our industry? That's where I think we should be thinking about. Because sustainability is also, if we think of ourselves, you and I, we've been around this industry for a long time. Right? I've been in the industry actually 25 years in 2 weeks, believe it or not.
Incredible.
So when I think about my brain as a resource, for as much criticism as I might cop from people, where's that going to go when I finished in this industry? Right? How do we download that? How do we educate the next generations of people coming into the industry? And I was talking about this with somebody a few weeks ago, and I don't know if we could ever get to this point, but I'd really like to see the industry come together. When companies now are very good, we operate internships, we operate apprenticeships sometimes. Mm-hmm. As an industry, how could we as an industry create a collaborative intern program or an education program where somebody comes to my company, comes to a colo company, to a hyperscale company, to a consultant, to a general contractor, to a subcontractor, to a facilities management company, and learns the industries and the skills. And then that person gets to pick and choose or gets assigned a role within one of those organizations so that we truly are collaborating. That's more of a big picture human element on sustainability as opposed to the energy and the environmental aspect. But what are we doing for society? That's my unanswered question. And there is a big question mark at the end of that. But we need to do more.
I think it's a great shift of the focus, because if we're talking about these issues like sustainability and making an impact, you got to start from within the industry, right? And those guiding and leading and developing it and sharing that or getting getting a much wider set of insights as well, because if you think about why sustainability is now rising up in, to become one of the most key priorities globally. Obviously, it's one because of the impact of the change in ecological situations globally, but also the newer generations, right, demanding that from the technology companies and the consumer companies that they consume content and services from. They're demanding it, so that's having a knock-on effect in the whole supply chain to the data center industry. So I think it's a great response that the industry itself should try and understand what does it look like, or how is it going to develop, and look at pass on this to the new generation in terms of how it's and it comes back to the whole point around how do we make the industry appealing to different swathes of graduates that maybe traditionally wouldn't have thought of entering it. So.
Well, that's right. And aside from making me feel old, as you describe that, as you do the generation gap, you talk about the content consumers and the users. right, at a societal level. How many of those people actually know what a data center is and how fundamental we are to their accessibility in everyday lives?
Yes.
There's a void, right?
They'll know, yeah, obviously, absolutely. And they'll, even if you go right down to the young population, they'll all know of the tools and the games and the systems running from data centers, but they won't think twice about how it all, that's always been the gap. And, that's where I think maybe schools and education with us as an industry, we need to get more engaged with is, that making them aware of it, because you're right. If you can tie Roblox to a data center, and you're at that age where the young just seem to be on there constantly, you're going to start growing up saying, obviously, do I become a game designer? Do I? But then they say, oh, where does this all run? And then it becomes, that's a driver of change. So I think it's a great positioning.
And that's, you just said something else real quickly then as well. One thing we should also recognize as an industry, we're actually creating and helping those developers and the programmers identify what they want to do for a living. Right? One of the knock-on effects of data centers is by providing these services and this access to games, we're actually creating jobs in entirely new industries and growing industries. We just don't realize it necessarily and talk about it. Mm-hmm. So what is the worth of a data center and the cost of a data center in sustainability if we're actually creating a new generation of potential developers, new education, not just construction of data centers, but new markets, new opportunities, especially in the countries that are just now developing data centers? Who knows what skills and education processes we could put in place? This is still sustainable, right? It's a human sustainability conversation, not operational.
Great stuff. I think if we don't stop soon, we're going to not be able to fit on the podcast. And we'll have to issue it in parts. So I think I'm gonna cut off the discussion there, and definitely hold you, Tony, to a follow-up or a series. Not just sustainability, but goodness, multiple different areas that we'd love to deep dive with you. So just to say from my perspective and from the DigitalCentre platform and on behalf of the other committee members and the listeners, thank you for making the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for letting me speak and get on my high horse a little bit. I've actually enjoyed it. Really, really, really good fun. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Tony. So thanks everyone for listening. A slightly longer podcast this edition, but hopefully you'll agree with us. It's some really, really interesting areas we ended up meandering into with Tony there. A lot of the topics we discussed, again, we'll share the links along with this podcast recording. So on the page itself, you'll be able to access the Vertiv committee homepage where Tony works. Also, obviously, Digital Realty from my perspective, but also we'll add a few links in there to our most recent sustainability reports and some of the features that we've issued as DigitalCentre as well on some of these topics for your reading. So it just remains me to say, as always, please do stay safe, stay well, stay happy, given everything that's happening at the moment in the world. And please do continue to track us and join us for the next edition of the DigitalCentre podcast. Thank you and goodbye.